Thigh, temple, headaches, tennis elbow, hip pain, polycystic ovarian syndrome, all of these things have one thing possibly in common. And is it a real thing, or is just this somebody trying to sell us a bill of goods about hormonal imbalances? Hey, everybody, this is Dr. V and me, and this is Truth or Trend. Today, we're going to talk about estrogen dominance, one of my favorite topics, because I think there's so many times that things are overlooked, and it's totally okay for people thinking to take all these extra hormones. And I'm not saying that you're a bad person for doing that, but we want to look at whether or not it's really the right solution and what are the risks involved in that? What are the dangers? I'll start out saying, I honestly believe that Breast Cancer Awareness Month should actually be Estrogen Dominance Awareness Month.
Nice.
That's my opener right there. Because 70% of all breast cancers, I think it's at least 70%, it could be more, are
Sure.
estrogen receptor positive.
Right.
And if somebody has been given a diagnosis of cancer, what's one of the first things that they're told to do? Stop all your hormones, right?
Right. Right.
I mean, your body makes these hormones, but the problem is that we have a lot of things that are potentially making these things way out of balance. Okay, so doctor,
Yes.
is this real? Is estrogen dominance a real thing or what? Tell me what your thoughts are here.
Unfortunately, it's rampant. It's prolific. It's crazy in America. There's the things that can cause it: high estrogen, estrogen, but high insulin, too much carbohydrate, sugars. That's going to make it worse. Think of the estrogenic brain, right? Ladies, you start craving sugar around menstruation, around ovulation. What happens is estrogen goes up. It causes carb sugar cravings. We feed yeast. Yeast perpetuates those carb sugar cravings. Yeast overgrowth is going to cause neck pain, neck tension, ultimately end up polycystic ovary syndrome, as you alluded to. Initial symptoms going to be that lateral epicondylitis, or what's typically called tennis elbow. Pain in the elbow is a hormonal problem. It's not because the way you're swinging the pickleball racket or the tennis racket, right? Or
Right.
doing dishes. It's a
Mhm.
hormonal problem. That is a hormone acupuncture point, a tonification point for the ovaries, actually, right on the outside of the elbow. And that's going to flare and get tender when there's estrogen dominance. And so, the big scare for you and I is like, hey, we have these symptoms. Okay, if as it continues on, you get the pear-shaped figure, big butt syndrome.
Yeah.
That's estrogen dominance, right? Whenever I see that, I think, oh, sorry, lady. I don't say this to her, obviously, but thinking she's probably has, painful periods because
Mm.
she's been flirting with estrogen dominance and carbohydrate intolerance for many years by that point. And
Yeah.
so if that continues and persists, then the liver is being challenged to continually break down these toxic metals, that cause inhibition of methylation. So then we can't break down the estrogen. Or if you're taking synthetic estrogen, the risk there is that we exhaust methylation, we exhaust P450 phase one, depending on which pathway, or glucuronidation. These are key pathways in the liver. If they don't work properly, we don't break down that estrogen, and that is where the big name conditions, symptoms, consequences, potentially fatal consequences come from.
So let's
So
just
that's
right away that estrogen dominance is definitely a thing. It's clearly a problem. And
right,
the reason that people have a hesitation to accept that is because there are so many people being given hormones, right? They're taking hormones
right,
for years.
right,
So the assumption is it's safe, right? Well, of course it's safe. My doctor gave me birth control. Of course it's safe. My doctor gave me bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And so
right,
it's really hard for people to accept that their doctor would be giving them something that has such dangerous consequences. But
right.
what you're just getting into with all of the science there that really kind of
Mhm.
went
Sorry.
complete. No, it's fantastic. Is that it's not just that we're taking too much of them, we're having a hard time breaking it down. There's many things that are contributing to this situation that
Right,
is making estrogen become an issue, right? Something that occurs in nature that should be good and healthy is
right.
just that we're getting way too much of it, and that
Hmm.
much of it is creating all kinds of problems. And I didn't even think about that when we first started talking, but weight gain. I mean, so
Hmm.
many women struggle with this stubborn weight loss,
Right,
and they forget that estrogen is a fat grower, right? I don't know
right,
how many times I need to say that over and again. If you have too much estrogen, it's going to grow fat. And that's
right.
exactly what it's meant to do. But
Preparing you to carry a baby,
exactly,
right?
exactly. Yeah. And if you're going to get your weight to where you feel healthy, you have to get the estrogen under control. It has to be in an appropriate amount in the body.
Right.
And, things like birth control are not, right? That's an
Right.
excess.
Right, right. So we're talking estrogen dominance. Two considerations. Is it because of synthetic estrogen that you're being exposed to, or is it because the liver is just simply not breaking it down properly anymore, creating those symptoms?
Or both,
Excuse
right?
me, or both,
Right.
right. So offline, you and I were talking about the infertile frogs and fish, and so that's talked about because of all the estrogen in the water. I always thought, oh, it's because the girls decide they're over their pill and they flush their, birth control pill. But the reality is, 70% of the women are on some kind of HRT or the pill at least, and that comes out in the urine. And so then they take it and doesn't get broken down, and they pee it out. Then the rest of us drink it in the water. And so we're all being exposed to these estrogenic consequences on a daily basis.
Right.
Then we've got all the, in estrogeneration, Anthony J talks about, he calls it the IRS, the ill reproductive system. We're going to put a link to this.
Well, here it is. I'm showing it right now.
There's
Oh,
a
okay,
link
yeah.
to the book, right? And
Estrogeneration.
right. And so
Bingo.
he calls it the IRS list, the ill reproductive system list, his top 10. And so he goes into the phytoestrogens, the plant sources of estrogen. We've got even some of the molds are sources of estrogen. We've got atrazine as a pesticide. We've got all the different plastics, red dyes. Fortunately, RFK, F. Kennedy Jr., is getting the red dyes out, so that's going to help us from an estrogen dominance perspective. But then we've got the parabens, which is from fragrance. We've got the phthalates, which is PTH, phthalates.
Yep.
uh,
That's
that's the uh,
that's what Dr.
that's the
Strong speaks
plastic.
about this weekend. Yep, the thousand.
Right, right. So that's a plastic estrogenic source. And then we've got the BPA and BPS. I always said, I'm okay using the plastic because most of the plastic I use is BPA free, but BPS is the same, has the same estrogenic effects. And so if they don't use BPA in your plastic water bottles, they typically have BPS instead. And then we've got the EE2, which is the synthetic estrogens that a lot of women are taking because rightfully so. They don't want to get pregnant every time they're doing marital performance or,
Right,
enjoying their marriage.
right.
So, I mean, we have all that. I mean, I've got lots of examples on, a gal that had the, Marina had the IUD, hormone releasing IUD, and she was a Olympic hopeful runner and was having chronic hip pain and that glute medius, the muscle on the top of the hip, kind of just below the belt, if you will. That muscle gets weak and tender when the ovary is challenged. So if we're putting synthetic hormones in there, that's going to create a functional weakness of that muscle over time. Joint is going to degenerate, and we're going to have hip osteoporosis, in there. We're going to have degeneration because calcium is going to lay down where it shouldn't, which is osteo arthritis in that area. Those are symptoms of chronic hormone imbalance. Then we've got the midlife gals that are, hey, I feel younger when my, doctor gives me my synthetic estrogen, but it's bio, what do they call it?
Identical. Yeah.
Bioidentical and, that sort of stuff. So, I mean, this gal I had 5 years, she's saying, I kept saying, your body's struggling. This is a challenge on your liver. We need to look at other options. We were trying to do some B vitamins and things to help her liver tolerate the hormones. Now we're having to treat her for breast cancer because, I warned her for, I don't know, 3 to 5 years about the potential consequence of what we're flirting with. Now the reality is there. Fortunately, we're getting ahead of it when she's doing very well. But again, that's kind of the concerns that we're up against with these early warning signs. That again, pain is the early warning sign that your body is struggling with, in this case, estrogen and estrogen metabolism. The other symptom, as laid out in the Headache Advantage book, is the bitemporal headaches. Poor estrogen metabolism tends to manifest as kind of like my headphones here would look as a headache. Um,
Right.
right. So we want to we want to look at what the causes are of those headaches, get the hormones metabolized properly to head off the grave consequences, but learn from what the body's telling us. If you were to eat plants, that are soy or something like that, or use plastic bottles that are estrogenic, it's going to manifest potentially as a bitemporal headache. If you're taking the pill, it's going to manifest potentially as a bitemporal headache. So we want to use that as a sign, an indicator to help clean up our life and take the early warning signs so that we don't have to chase the chemo and all the ugly, grave consequences there.
Right, right.
Mm.
There's so much there. And I think that's just it, is I think what I'm hoping that this episode is going to do is to help people understand that it's a real danger, number one, right? It's not
Right.
just about gaining weight or having headaches. It can turn into much major consequences, but also there's so much you can do to help your body bring back balance. So much will get better in your body, of course, when you do that.
Hmm. Hmm.
I was first kind of tuned into this estrogen making people gain weight thing or being a problem from attending a lecture from Dr. Chi, who was giving people something called an aromatase, inhibitor, basically,
Hmm.
right? Trying
Hmm.
to stop testosterone from turning into estrogen. That was his
Right.
whole answer, right? It's because he's saying that too often we have people that are becoming estrogen dominant because of that. And that's just one tiny little piece of it, right? And that's just
Right.
there's all these other pieces. So I just want to share this really quickly here to kind of give people a visual. I always point this out, right? You've got testosterone down here. Can you see that, Dr. B?
Yes. Mhm.
Right. And this right here is a conversion. Testosterone will turn into estrogen. So many times people don't realize that. All these guys taking tea, right? It's
Right.
converting
Right.
into estrogen.
Hmm.
There's
Hmm.
an enzyme here called aromatase that makes that conversion. And the Dr. Chi is selling this product to people all around the country just to slow this down and make that change. And I thought, well, that's
Right.
kind of helpful, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Aromatase inhibitors. But my question was, well, what do we do once it eventually does become estrogen, right? That's
Yeah.
the other
Right.
thing.
Right. Well, in there, I mean, carbohydrates, insulin
Right,
causes that shift. So for us men, we eat too much carbohydrate, then causes testosterone to convert to estrogen there, right? In
right,
women, it's the opposite. In women, carbohydrates cause estrogen to convert to testosterone. So that's the woman with chin hair, right?
right,
Acne, that you get acne on their back or acne in general. That's often estrogen converting, right?
right.
So again, get to the cause. Don't take a aromatase inhibitor like most of the medications or estrogen inhibitor. Like, oh, you've been, how many times are gals told that, you have a hormone dependent cancer, you need to block estrogen the rest of your life, or at least the next 5 years. Why don't we talk about metabolizing the estrogen, get the synthetic estrogen out of the system?
Right.
There's your cancer prevention protocols. Get to the cause instead of trying to block the hormones and make yourself just feel heinous, really lousy, and
Right.
not have the body functioning as it should. Much better longevity that way. Mhm.
So why is it metabolizing? Maybe that's the question we should ask people. Is it because we're
Right,
being exposed to too many chemicals and our body is focusing on trying to break those chemicals down, like the glyphosates? Or is
right.
it because we're not supporting our body's ability to facilitate those pathways to break it down? Or is it both? Right? I guess is
All
the
of the above, right?
right.
So ultimately, our livers are under stress
Mhm.
24/7 because we live in a toxic environment. In the industrialized age, we have chemicals in the air that we breathe. We have chemicals in the food, pesticides and things in the foods that we eat. We've got the girls are putting all their cosmetics and things on. I mean, most of the anti-aging face creams and stuff are estrogenic as well, right? And so they're trying to, stay young, but actually accelerating the aging process in doing that by putting further stress on the liver. When the liver's stressed, we get those brown, what people call age spots. That's a sign of poor methylation. The typical things that compromise methylation is toxic metals, as we've been discussing, and stress, cortisol, and toxic metals inhibit methylation, and that's like one of the key pathways to break down estrogen. So you combine that with, and there's toxic metals, there's toxins in vaccines, there's toxins in most of the medications, there's toxins in everything we eat, drink, and use. So how much can the body tolerate ultimately is
Right.
is kind of what it comes down to. So use, as you and I are, our niche here, our platform is to try and empower people to learn from what their body's telling them so that they can head these grave consequences off and thrive ultimately. I mean, the
Right.
better you feel, the better you can function, right? The more productive you are, the more valuable you are at work, more valuable you are to your family, all of that.
So if I'm the listener right now, and I hope the message has been that too much estrogen's totally bad thing, and it's starting to
Right.
become overwhelming. It's starting to sound like it's almost impossible, right, to avoid
Hmm. Hmm.
it. And there's so
Right.
much we have to do to be able to do this. So let's start to let's start to give them some real actionable things that would, in order of importance, that if
Mhm.
you start to recognize that maybe you're headed towards estrogen dominance, the first things that you should start doing, right? If you're getting that tennis elbow, if you're having the hip pain, if you're having those bitemporal headaches, if
Mhm.
you're starting to grow weight and you can't get rid of that weight, what would be one of the first things, Dr. V, that you would say if you can give them one action step to get them started? What would it be?
Well, let's look at the nutrients to help break those estrogens down. Maybe do a liver detox, right? You like a lot of those. We want to start fresh,
Yep.
but it's a self-evaluation. Look at the IRS, the ill reproductive system list, the top 10. See what you're most commonly exposed to, right? And so
Right.
that's going to, are you doing synthetic estrogen? Are you on the pill? I mean, there's a great place to start. Are you eating a lot of soy product? Are you vegetarian, trying to use soy as your source of protein? First and foremost, make sure it's organic. That's an issue in and of itself. But soy is the same structure as estrogen functionally, as it's called. That's why it's called a phyto or a plant source of estrogen. Much like yams are a plant source of progesterone. So we
Right.
have these things in nature that duplicate or mimic hormones in their amino acid, their protein structure. So if you're eating a lot of that, that's a place to consider. If you're eating a lot of sugar, the reason you're having carb sugar cravings is probably because of estrogen dominance. Try to tame that sugar monster, get those carb sugar cravings out. Maybe you need to take a berberine or a supplement to help stabilize blood sugar so that you can tame those cravings. It's going to be a self-evaluation, but I mean, great transition there. Yes, where do we start? If you're using synthetic hormones, look at getting to the cause, the reason, get rid of the reason you took the hormones in the first place,
Let's start there,
right?
right? I think that's the biggest question is because there are people are convinced that they need to keep taking these hormones because they feel a difference when they start taking them. They're worried
Right,
about those things. And I know women in their 70s who are continuing to take these because they feel like it's the fountain of youth. So
right.
what 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 can they do instead, right, of taking
hmm
these
hmm
hormones is the question I think that they need to know.
Right. So eat your good fats.
Right? Well, there you go.
Good
Right.
fats are the building blocks to those hormones. If your cholesterol is high, it's likely because you're deficient in hormones and your body's trying to produce cholesterol to make those hormones.
Hmm.
Use that as a further sign. So, or if you're eating too much sugar, that is likely why your hormones were out of balance in the first place and caused you to take the pill. If you're taking the contraceptive because of symptomatic stuff, not because of contraception, then look at the carbohydrate, the corn, for example. We need to include that. Corn is the most common trigger of ovarian cysts. So if you're having polycystic ovary syndrome or you're having that hard acute ovarian pain monthly, uh, I'd strongly encourage you to cut corn out of your diet because that is the massive trigger for ovarian
See that
cysts.
there, that's worth listening to this episode right alone, right? Do all these things and chase these things, but if you're eating corn
Right,
every day, that's
right,
fuel on the fire that you have to stop,
hmm
bring that fuel on. And
right.
corn is hard for some people, right?
It's
Tortilla,
everywhere.
are, you know, those are salty, delicious little snacks that everybody wants to dig into. But yeah,
Right,
corn is put into everything. So yeah, maybe that would be the one thing you should start looking at to try to reduce or remove is your
right.
exposure to corn in general.
Right. People are
Unfortunately.
told to go gluten-free, right? But corn is a gluten-free grain. So if you're told to go gluten-free, high probability that
Wow.
corn's going to be the ingredient there.
Oh man. Okay.
Right.
That's funny because I was just Jack Dubois just gave a presentation on the standard process farms, and he was pointing out how corn used to have hundreds of nutrients in it, and now it's 1.5, right?
Oh,
So
serious?
yeah, the change is like astronomical in the corn that we're given now versus what it used to be naturally. Because that's another thing for people to wrap their head around. I know a lot of farmers growing up in Wisconsin be like, "Well, come on, I grew up on corn." I'm like,
Mhm.
it's a different corn than what we have now, right?
Right.
Not
They
the
grew
same.
up on corn that had worms still in you peel the corn,
Yeah,
there's worms in there. They're not there anymore because worms don't even want it.
right.
Right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
hmm
exactly. Okay, well, that's a huge takeaway right there. Is
hmm
will help that contributes to it for sure. I mean, because the sugar thing can be overwhelming for people, right? Because that is a big piece. I've talked to a lot of women who have polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I show them the research. There's tons of research, right, that says
hmm
go keto, right? That's the thing
Right,
to do
right.
because they're like they think there's nothing they can do, but that's because that's such a big thing. But corn, if you can focus on that one to get rid of, see what that
Right,
does for you alone. That's the first big step right there, I would.
right. And
That's a
then
good
so
reminder.
that's especially critical on the younger women struggling with this. For the older women that are contemplating, HRT for their hot flashes and night sweats and so on, the interesting for me is, I mean, I looked at the carbohydrates, as a trigger for that, but I find fruit of all things. So I think, a lot of gals that are listening to this are going to be health oriented. Too much fruit, typically more than 2 servings a day, will set up estrogen dominance and will set up these hot flashes and night sweats and things, and ultimately cancers, hormone dependent cancers. Had a gal years ago that had a bunch of fruit trees in her backyard. And so every summer she'd have crazy hot flashes. I'm like, because all she would eat was that yummy fruit coming off the trees in her backyard. And, I kept saying, look, you're flirting with danger. She ultimately, unfortunately, ended up diabetic, and she's no longer with us because she was, for years, every summer I'd have the same issue with her. And, it was a fatal response, unfortunately. It really dramatically shortened her life. So, I mean, learn from that. Let's learn from what our body's trying to tell us. If you're in the later years, too much carbohydrate, too much fruit potentially is going to set up those hot flashes, those estrogen dominant symptoms. If you're younger, consider corn again. Sugar still too much. Consider the synthetic hormones and what you're doing to your body. Feed your liver. Help, milk thistle, all the different B vitamins. A lot of the B vitamins help drive B6, niacin, B1. B1's a another thiamine, or in standard process nomenclature, that's a cataplex B type of a product. That is one of the main nutrients to help break down estrogen. So if you're having these bitemporal headaches, if you're also having tension headaches or pain in the back of the head, the thyroid, and which means thyroid and estrogen and hormones are all B1 dependent. So that comes up 3 or 4 times in my book as a multiple headache pattern. Left-sided headache is a stomach problem. That is also a B1 dependent organ. So if you have multiple headaches like this, B1 thiamine is a great place to start, a good source of thiamine to help your liver break down that estrogen, to help you. Hey, it's probably going to give you a little bit of energy too.
Yeah. Comes back to B1 so often with us, doesn't it? Vitamin
It
B1,
does.
right? It really
Right,
does.
right. 'Cause it's
Big deal.
processed out of our foods.
So in this line, what you're talking about, which is great, we've talked about things that we should remove, right? Sugar, if you can, as
Right,
best you can.
right. Hmm.
Corn, as best you can, and of course, if
Hmm.
you can find a way to not be actually pouring actual hormones into your body, that's a great idea too, right? But
Hmm. Hmm.
what about the things that we need to add in to help your body to clear it, right? I always think about first, one of the biggest things that people aren't doing is eating enough fiber to help your body bind to and remove the excess estrogen, right?
Great
Um,
point.
because
Hmm.
the average American's eating what, 12, maybe 15 grams of fiber, and there's excellent research out there that shows you get to 30 to 40 grams of fiber a day and you're reducing your risk of breast cancer almost down to zero in a lot of these research studies, just because of the components, right, of all of the
Hmm.
chemicals. And then
Hmm.
last,
Hmm.
estrogen. Yeah, your body needs that fiber to help remove the estrogen. And
Right.
I know that every case of breast cancer that I've ever sat with in my clinic had a period of their time of their life where they were constipated. So they weren't clearing the estrogen, and it
Mm.
was accumulating and more in their body, period of
Mm.
years where they were constipated.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
that's something to think about. You have to have that fiber to help move that, but also to move that out. So I always think about fiber being the last thing. And I don't think enough people are eating enough cruciferous vegetables just in general to give you all of that chemistry that we were talking about to
Right. To
facilitate
drive
all of those changes.
drive all those liver pathways we just talked about with the
Right.
right cruciferous
Make the
veggies.
conversions, right, of
Right.
the estrogen out. And I
Mm.
think the big piece that people are really missing is iodine. I think that's another, yeah, those are my big three. When I start to think of the things
Hmm.
people are missing that could be majorly contributing to the estrogen is just not getting completely converted and removed from the body, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
If we're trying to slow down the conversion, well, once it's converted, we still need to facilitate it being finished and cleared out. And those are
Sure.
three that I think people should look at whether or not they're getting enough of personally.
And we should probably add good fats in there, right?
Right.
We need that. You talked about going keto, right? The shift with keto is, one, it stabilizes blood sugar. Two, it gives us the building blocks to make and produce those hormones like we were talking about with cholesterol. And three, it's anti-inflammatory. So more of the good fats. I mean, just about every new patient that comes in is too acidic, and that's a general indication that they are deficient in omegas. You're doing the omega test on patients. I mean, right? What percentage of your patients are deficient in the omega threes?
99.9%.
Right. So let's get the building blocks, to allow our body to the EFAs, they help prevent how's this, skid marks, stretch marks.
Well, if we can help prevent those too, that'd be great.
They can do that, yeah. So they help prevent stretch marks. Think of like, pregnancy and so on, right? Keeps us stretch marks down, helps create a healthy brain for the child. And back when you were talking about the estrogen being, and the constipation that goes along with that, I learned actually on a pregnancy calendar that progesterone is actually constipating.
Oh, yeah.
So there's another hormone, hormones get out of whack and too much progesterone. That's another subject, but that is, excuse me, constipating. Excuse me. Take it over.
Yeah, get some of that water. No, that's true. And so that's a question I get a lot from women. It's like, well, I'm taking some testosterone and I'm taking estrogen and I'm taking progesterone. And I'm thinking, well, man, are you going to give your body a chance to figure this out? And I hesitate
Yeah.
to say that it's okay for anybody to take exogenous hormones, but they've been told by a million people that it is. I
Right.
always start with being like, hey, listen, can we at least not add in the estrogen? Because that's the one that we know what's
Right.
associated with cancer. And the testosterone you're taking is going to turn into estrogen. The progesterone you're taking is eventually going to turn into estrogen, right? So help me understand the rationale as to why you should be taking exogenous progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen. That doesn't make any sense
Right.
to me at all. If
Hmm.
somebody can leave in a comment below, like, tell me why I'm wrong and tell me why I'm
Truth or trend.
right, exactly. But I just get so concerned because people are not talking about the fact that this breast cancer is so much driven by this, right? This excess estrogen. And so how are we
Right.
getting even more of that in? I don't know. If there's anybody out there listening, that's the one thing I'm hoping we're driving point home is before you put in excess or exogenous estrogen, can we look at anything else that we could do?
Right. And there's plenty to do. It takes a little bit of discipline. Maybe that's why, right?
Yeah, it does.
And in modern medicine wants to give people a silver bullet and an easy fix.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, doesn't typically address or the ultimate, potential consequences, potential advancing complications.
Well,
So,
and this is what here's my canned response to that, right? Yes, you're going to feel great when you get these hormones in you for a minute, but it's a
hmm.
long-term solution, just like taking cocaine isn't a great long-term solution for energy problems, right? It's a great
Right.
short-term solution, I would imagine, right? I see
Hmm.
people on that stuff. They can go out, but you can't
Right.
be like, oh, well, my problems are solved, right? So
Right.
you're gonna have to pay the consequences. And I think to your point, it using as always this information as to what's wrong in the body that I have to take these hormones in the first place. So like what is not
Right.
being nourished? What is being inhibited? And if you don't ever answer that, then you're going to have these mystery illnesses someday that the doctors just say, oh, this is idiopathic, blah, 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 right? Well, it's
Hmm.
idiopathic. You've been pouring fuel on the fire since you were in your teens with taking birth control.
Right.
Um, I don't know. Is that you get that cough out because my rant is coming to
You did a great rant there, and you summarized well. I mean, ultimately, again, we're here to empower you, the listener, to learn from what your body's trying to tell you, right? Your body's pain is an indicate. Pain is there to inspire change,
yeah.
right? And so, if you have tension, if you have bitemporal headaches, you have pain in the hips, you have pain in the elbow, you have painful periods. This is the alarm system in your body saying, make a change, reconsider the way you're eating, living, doing, what you're exposed to. So, I mean, that's where you have to, maybe you have to journal, create a log of what you're eating. And when you get more hot flashes or more of these, estrogenic symptoms, then look at, oops, I was eating, I just ate a bunch of soy yesterday, or I went out, I celebrated my kid's birthday and I ate a bunch of sugar and dessert or whatever. There's always triggers in life if we can, be patient enough to look at it. I mean,
Mhm.
that's my role as a practitioner, and many of the practitioners listening to this, that is our role to help shorten that curve and that learning curve to figure those out. But without somebody like us in the world, or in their environment, or you may have to be patient and track it to figure it out yourself. Mm.
Mhm. And that's just it. I don't know how many times we can all be reminded that when we're having something wrong, we need to look back. What did we do the last few days? What did we put in this body in the last few days?
Yes, right,
It's amazing living in this world and being a nutritionist and constantly looking at that, how it still is something that I have to remind everybody about constantly is to
right.
that for those things. All right, so estrogen dominance. It's an unfortunate trend that has a lot of truth to it, right?
It is,
And
yeah,
if we ignore it, if we pretend like it's not a thing, then we're going to come into all kinds of problems in the future.
right.
So we want to encourage everybody to really second guess whether or not you should be adding in estrogen into your body.
Hmm.
And can you think of a situation where somebody actually would need to, right? Actually add in estrogen exogenous? Right? Idiot.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't imagine. I mean, even, a kid, failing to thrive, I mean, support the pituitary even. So,
Right.
there's always better ways. There's always a deeper cause that can be addressed naturally, nutritionally. Um, yeah.
We haven't even touched on supporting the endocrine system until just now, right? All the way into
Right.
this. And that's another thing that I think that people don't realize is possible is supporting your ovaries and your adrenals and your,
Not my ovaries.
well, yeah, I support
That's
your
another just
ovaries with my whole heart.
hugs.
Um,
No,
Sorry, I'm going with
yes.
this. Is that maybe we should do an episode about these protomorphogens? We should maybe do an episode about this specific, because you teach a whole seminar on
12
autoimmune.
hours,
Please,
right? Hmm.
please on that. And I think people need to know more about that as a healing agent, as a possibility of something that is probably essential at this point for us to be able to mitigate the damages of the world we live in with all of the
Hmm.
estrogen mimickers out there and all of that. We do need to find ways to protect that. So that'll probably be our next little episode.
All
Let's talk
right.
about those things.
Mhm. So
But
stay
overall,
tuned. We'll give
yeah,
you some pearls on what supplements to consider, what protomorphogens based on your symptoms.
right. So overall, I think our takeaways are question whether or not you should put hormones into your body exogenously. And if you have
Yes.
to, don't let it end there. Make sure
Hmm.
you look to how can you heal the reason you need those hormones. And it's not just because you're getting older. Let's remind
Right.
people
Right.
would be
Hmm.
told, oh, but I'm postmenopausal. I have to do it. Would you agree with that statement? No.
No.
There's so much
Right.
you can do.
So, I mean, the reality is postmenopausal, just to throw another wrench in the program. Ultimately, what happens is menopause is the ovaries shutting down and the adrenals need to pick up the slack. So if we're stressed out, we don't have the adrenal reserves to pick up the slack, then we have menopausal, perimenopausal symptoms. So if that's the case, support the adrenals. There we have herb supplements. Wild yam is typically my favorite supplement herb for those transitional years, the perimenopausal years, helps resensitize the receptors so that they can have something, they can smooth out that transition. But support the adrenals, look at herbs like wild yam to support during that transition.
That's what
Younger
you forget about
ladies,
all these
chase tree.
powerful herbs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Recovery, right? There's a whole world of herbals out there that can really help with it, that will have side benefits versus the dangerous side effects of actually taking hormones and then just hoping your body sorts it out somehow, right?
Side benefits. I love it.
Exactly, exactly.
Right, right.
All right. Well, those of you who are listening still, thank you for being here with us. And please leave some comments or questions below. I know this is a complicated issue, but I do think it's something that needs to be repeated many, many, many times. We should always be
Mm-hmm.
asking, is estrogen dominance a part of the problem here? Because the
Hmm.
likelihood of it being a part of the problem is extremely high in the world that we live in. And if
Yes.
that person is taking hormones, then it's definitely a part of the problem. If because you have to manage what's happening when that comes. So don't just accept what so many people have said that is totally normalized. We've had this deviation from nature totally
Hmm.
normalized by
Hmm.
people saying, oh no, you just need to take some hormones, you'll be fine, right? That's not right. And it's not good for your longevity and it's not good for your long-term health. But please question anything we've said, throw it in the comments. We're happy to have a conversation about this because we just think it's important that people are aware that this is a dangerous thing that's happening and that there are so many other things that you can do and so much you can learn from it if you need to be doing that. Anything else you want to
Absolutely.
say, Dr. V, before we sign off on this episode?
Great job. That was fun. Again, I know it's daunting and overwhelming. Look at the IRS list, the ill reproductive system list, if you're struggling with this, and pick out what is the most likely your culprit, and start there. Start with a simple change, and continue. And it's all about how good can you really feel. Ask yourself that every single meal.
Where can they find this IRS list? Or are you saying that we're providing this list?
You're going to attach it to
Oh, I'm going to attach
chat.
it. I will find it and I will make it available.
I
Yeah.
texted it to you this morning.
Okay. Okay. Sweet. Sweet, sweet. And for me, a powerful reminder is this corn piece. I think that's a simple question practitioners can ask. Where were you eating corn? Have you been eating a lot of corn? Can you resist those tortilla chips, right? Look at
Yep.
everything you're eating, because that's a big reminder for me. I know that we commonly want to look at these big things that are causing these issues, but that connection was a good reminder for me right there.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Great.
Go forth and
Thanks,
prosper.
all right. You guys have a good one. We'll see you next week. We'll be talking about these smart tissue support products called PMGs.